The summer sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold as the Dawson family loaded their bags into the pale blue minivan. It was July 2005, the kind of morning where the air itself seemed alive with heat, shimmering on the pavement. "Seatbelts, everyone," Thomas Dawson, the father, called as he shut the trunk. His voice carried a forced cheerfulness, as though he were already tired before the trip had even begun. Beside him, his wife, Margaret, tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear and slid into the passenger seat. She checked her phone twice before fastening her belt. The gesture was subtle, almost nervous, but none of the children noticed. The four Dawson kids filled the van with their noise, music blasting from a shared CD player, arguments over window seats, the youngest whining for a snack before they'd even left the driveway. For neighbors watching them drive away, it was an ordinary family outing. Nothing suggested they would never return. The first hours of the drive were uneventful. They laughed, sang along to a song that skipped every few seconds, and played road trip games. But as the miles slipped by and the landscape grew emptier, the atmosphere shifted. The wide highways narrowed into cracked country roads. Fields turned to thick stretches of woodland. The van's engine seemed louder in the silence of nowhere. "Dad, are we lost?" one of the children asked. Thomas gripped the wheel tighter. "No, just taking a different route, shorter." But Margaret glanced at the road signs, her brow furrowing. She knew they weren't on the route she had written down. By mid-afternoon, a storm gathered. The sky darkened, rain pelting against the windshield in heavy sheets. The children fell quiet, lulled by the rhythm of the storm. It was in that eerie calm that Margaret pulled out her phone. She dialed quickly, voice low, as if not to be overheard. "We're on Highway 16. I don't like this. Something feels wrong." There was a pause, a distant voice on the other end. Then Margaret whispered again, this time sharper. "No, listen, he's taking us off the route." The call cut off. Not with a goodbye, not with static, but with a sudden, chilling silence. Hours later, when investigators traced the call, it would end abruptly at 3:17 p.m., mid-sentence, with no explanation. No one would ever hear Margaret Dawson's voice again. Neighbors reported the family never arrived at their destination. Police searched the highways, combed through nearby towns, and even sent divers into rivers. No wreckage, no belongings, no bodies. The minivan had vanished as though swallowed whole by the road itself. In the days that followed, headlines screamed of the missing six. Rumors spread. Abduction, accident, even whispers of the supernatural. But none of the theories explained why Margaret's final call sounded more like a warning than a plea for help. One detective, long retired now, would later admit that the tone of her voice still haunted him. "It wasn't fear," he said. "It was recognition, as if she already knew what was about to happen." What or who did Margaret Dawson recognize that afternoon on the vanishing road? 20 years had passed since the Dawson family disappeared. The world moved on, but in the small towns along Highway 16, their absence remained a wound that never healed. Children who had been toddlers were now adults, and yet the memory of their family still lingered, like smoke that refused to disperse. Claire Monroe, a young investigative journalist with a reputation for chasing cold cases, stared at the faded newspaper clippings pinned to her corkboard. Yellowed headlines screamed, "Family of 6 missing without a trace. Vanishing on Highway 16, mystery deepens." There were a few photos, smiling faces frozen in time, frozen in a moment that would never continue. The story had been filed away, classified as one of those unresolved disappearances, the kind of cases that haunt local gossip and fade from national news. But Claire wasn't interested in fading. She had a knack for finding what others overlooked. She picked up the phone and called a retired detective who had worked on the case back in 2005. His voice was hesitant, gravelly with age. "I don't know why you're calling," he muttered. "That case, it was a nightmare. I've said all I can say." "I just want to understand," Claire pressed. "People vanished, lives ended, and someone must know what happened. Even a small clue, anything could help." A long silence followed. Finally, the detective whispered, almost conspiratorially, "There was something we were told never to look into. Something that made people disappear from more than just the road." Claire's pulse quickened. She scribbled the words in her notebook. "Something we were told never to look into. A warning, a threat. Her instincts screamed that the truth lay beyond the official reports, buried in shadows where authorities had refused to tread. She began her interviews with neighbors who remembered the family, digging into police records, old phone logs, and archived footage of traffic cameras from the day the Dawson van vanished. Every lead seemed to circle back to the same eerie emptiness: the van, the family, and a silence that had lasted for decades. One former neighbor, a man with a shaky voice, recounted how he'd once seen Margaret Dawson pacing the driveway late at night, talking on the phone with someone unknown. "She didn't look like herself," he said. "Something about her." Tense, scared, like she knew we couldn't help her, Claire listened, heart hammering. The pieces were fragile, scattered across decades, but they pointed to one undeniable fact: the disappearance wasn't random. Someone or something had orchestrated it, and the road that swallowed the Dawsons might not have been the only danger they faced. The question lingered, heavy and suffocating. What secret had been so dangerous that it haunted an entire highway for 20 years, and who had been determined to keep it hidden? It was early spring when construction crews began clearing land for a new residential development on the outskirts of the county. The project had been routine, mundane, until a bulldozer operator's metal claw scraped against something solid beneath the earth. At first he thought it was a boulder, but as the machinery dug deeper, a cold, corroded shape emerged: the pale blue minivan, unmistakably familiar to those who had followed the Dawson case 20 years earlier. Police were summoned immediately, but even seasoned officers felt an unease they couldn't name. The vehicle was submerged at the base of a small, forgotten quarry, partially hidden by years of overgrowth. The windshield was cracked, jagged lines forming spiderwebs across the glass. Rust had claimed the roof and sides, but the interior told a far more sinister story. Seats were torn, the upholstery soaked in dark, hardened stains. Crumpled wrappers of long-decayed snacks littered the floor. A child's shoe, one small and faded, rested under the passenger seat, half buried in silt. Nothing else, no personal belongings, no luggage, no phones. Just the van, frozen in time, a vessel of secrets. Detectives examined the vehicle meticulously. Forensics could only confirm what everyone already feared. The van had not been abandoned by accident. There were no skid marks, no signs of a crash. The quarry's steep embankments suggested deliberate placement. Whoever had done this wanted the world to never see it. Claire Monroe arrived that evening, stepping over mud and weeds, camera in hand. She crouched beside the van, the air thick with the iron scent of rust and decay. She peered inside through the broken glass, imagining the family trapped within, arguing, frightened, unaware of the fate waiting for them. "Detective," she called softly to the officer standing nearby. "How is this possible? Why here, in the middle of nowhere?" He shook his head, voice low. "We don't know. Whoever did this, they knew exactly what they were doing." The quarry wasn't even on any map 20 years ago. It was hidden, secluded, perfect for this. Claire's mind raced. Hidden, secluded, a perfect tomb. The thought of someone orchestrating such calculated evil sent chills down her spine. And yet, there was another detail, subtle but unnerving. The van's hazard lights were still faintly operational, battery somehow clinging to life after 2 decades. A faint blinking pulse that seemed almost alive, like a heartbeat in the darkness. She photographed the interior, every stain, every tear, every small object. She noticed something else, a faint smear on the driver's side door. Not blood, not rust, something deliberate, as if someone had marked it for remembrance or warning. She could not tell. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, Claire stepped back, staring at the van. The air was thick with unanswered questions, each one sharper than the last. Who had placed the Dawsons here? And if the van had survived hidden for 20 years, what other truths were buried alongside it, waiting to be uncovered? The quarry seemed to swallow the van, and with it, every hope of closure. Claire returned to the county the following week, armed with notebooks, audio recorders, and a growing unease that the Dawson case was far from ordinary. She began with neighbors, people who had watched the family for years without truly seeing them. Most were hesitant, but slowly, fragments emerged. Fragments that hinted the family had never been as perfect as photographs suggested. A woman named Lillian, who had lived next door for decades, spoke softly, eyes darting to the street as if the past might reappear at any moment. "They seemed Normal, I suppose. Smiling kids, a dad with a laugh. But sometimes I'd see them fighting behind closed doors. The mother, she often spoke on the phone late at night. Secretly, it made me uneasy. Claire scribbled rapidly. Secret calls, quiet arguments, a picture of a family that, at first glance, seemed ordinary, but under the surface, tensions had festered. A former classmate of the eldest son recalled that Thomas Dawson could be charming, even fatherly, but he had a temper that sometimes scared the children. One time, the man said, voice trembling, he nearly hit my brother during a backyard argument. He wasn't a bad man, but there was something dangerous about him. Something no one understood. Claire felt the weight of each testimony pressing on her chest. The more she learned, the darker the portrait became. Financial troubles the public never saw, whispered threats between parents, and jealousy simmering among the children. Even the youngest, barely 10 at the time, had been described as unusually quiet, observing too much, absorbing every tension. Then, a chilling revelation. An uncle recalled Thomas Dawson telling him in a rare private moment, "If we go missing, don't believe what they tell you." The words were cryptic, almost paranoid but unmistakable. Thomas had suspected something, or someone, and he had feared that the truth would be distorted, buried under lies too heavy for the public to unravel. Claire's recorder captured every pause, every stutter, the tremor in Lillian's voice, the haunted look in the classmates' eyes. She realized that the disappearance wasn't just a sudden event on a lonely highway. It had been preceded by tension, fear, and perhaps knowledge of danger no one dared confront. But amidst these revelations, there was an unspoken question no one could answer. Who had threatened the Dawsons? Who had made them vanish so completely? Every lead seemed to point to a shadowy presence, a threat that remained hidden in plain sight. Claire left the interviews shaken. The family she had once seen in smiling photographs now loomed in her mind as ghosts, a father warning in whispers, a mother keeping secrets on late-night calls, children who may have witnessed more than they could bear. And somewhere, beyond these testimonies, lay the truth, buried and waiting. What had the Dawsons known that made their disappearance inevitable? Claire had spent days tracing the remnants of the Dawson household, seeking anything that could illuminate the family's final days. One lead brought her to a cramped apartment in a neighboring town, where the former best friend of the eldest Dawson daughter, Emily, had kept a box of belongings the girl had left behind. The box smelled of old paper and dust, yet inside, Claire found something that would change everything. A small, leather-bound diary, its edges frayed, its lock broken. The first pages were innocent, recounting school days, birthday parties, and family vacations. But as Claire read further, a darker pattern emerged. Emily wrote of her father's volatile temper, the way arguments erupted over money, trivial frustrations, and more disturbingly, over secrets she was only beginning to comprehend. The words were blunt, raw, and filled with fear. "She doesn't know I'm watching," Emily wrote one night. "I can't tell anyone." Mom calls him late at night, the man she whispers to on the phone. "I hate the way Dad frowns when he sees her talking. Something's wrong, but I can't stop it." Claire's hands shook as she read the entries aloud, recording each word. The diary revealed layers of tension and betrayal that no external investigation had uncovered. There were accusations between siblings, jealousy, and whispered fears that someone was listening in their own home. The youngest child's notebooks found alongside Emily's diary hinted at strange occurrences in the house. Doors that creaked open on their own, shadows that moved without explanation. But the most chilling revelation lay in the final pages. Emily described a secret she had planned to reveal, a late-night conversation she overheard between her parents. She scribbled hurriedly, "Tomorrow I'll finally tell him the truth. Maybe it will stop this. Maybe it will save us all. I just hope he listens before it's too late." The entry ended mid-sentence as if Emily had been interrupted, or worse, silenced. Claire reread the words, heart pounding. Whoever had taken the Dawsons knew something Emily didn't want them to see, and her diary implied that the youngest daughter may have witnessed parts of the unfolding danger. Claire also noticed subtle codes Emily had used, a series of dots and dashes at the bottom of certain pages. She couldn't decipher them yet, but they suggested a plan, a secret message meant to be understood only by someone who knew her. As Claire left the apartment that evening, diary clutched tightly. She felt the weight of the family's hidden truths pressing down on her. The entries didn't just hint at fear, they suggested a betrayal from within, a fracture that may have led to the family's disappearance. Who had Emily been planning to warn? And if she had tried, why had her message been cut short? In the silence of the abandoned streets, Claire realized one thing. The Dawson family's fate was far more complex than anyone had imagined. The diary didn't just illuminate the past, it whispered of secrets still alive waiting to be uncovered, and dangers that had been lying in wait for 20 years. Claire spent the following week combing through phone records and old police files. Margaret Dawson's late-night calls had been dismissed at the time as mundane or secretive, but patterns began to emerge. A series of numbers kept appearing, calls made to untraceable prepaid phones registered under false names. One contact in particular stood out. A man with no known address, but multiple sightings along the highways surrounding the disappearance. Whispers in the town hinted at his connections. A motorcycle gang operating along Highway 16 and the surrounding backroads. Locals remembered seeing sleek black motorcycles parked at the edges of forests, drivers with leather jackets and obscured faces. Rumors had always attached the gang to petty crime, but the timing of the Dawson disappearance suggested something far more sinister. Claire approached a former gang member, now estranged from his old companions. He agreed to meet at a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. "I didn't like that night," he said, voice low, eyes darting to the windows. "We saw the van. Lights on, kids inside arguing. But I swear, I didn't touch it. And the guys who did, they weren't thinking small." He described two men, strangers even to him, pulling the Dawson van over along a secluded stretch. There was a confrontation, he said, though he couldn't hear the words. The van eventually continued on the road, driven by someone else. The gang member's hand shook as he recalled the scene, his guilt mingled with fear. "I don't know what happened after that," he admitted. "We were told to stay away, but I saw enough to know. It wasn't an accident." Claire's recorder captured every hesitant word. She realized the disappearance wasn't a random highway incident, it was orchestrated. And someone powerful had orchestrated it from the shadows. Her research revealed another layer of horror. Margaret Dawson's phone records hinted at repeated communication with this mysterious man, days leading up to the trip. Were they friends? Enemies? Or was she negotiating something no one else could see? The diary Claire had found earlier added to the mystery. Emily had hinted at a man her mother was speaking to, someone who terrified her father. Who was this stranger? And what role had he played in the family vanishing without a trace? That evening, Claire drove along the route the Dawsons had taken. Rain-slicked roads reflected neon signs and empty highways. She imagined headlights cutting through the fog. The family inside, unaware of the danger looming behind. Somewhere out there, the shadow of the man, perhaps the same one Margaret had called, still lingered. His presence both elusive and threatening. Claire couldn't shake the sensation that she was being watched, that each discovery was drawing her closer to a force that preferred to remain hidden. The past, it seemed, was not done with her yet. And the question lingered, sharper than ever. If the gang hadn't acted alone, who else had been orchestrating the Dawson family's disappearance? And why had the mother's warning gone unheard? Claire's investigation led her to a quiet cul-de-sac on the edge of the county, where an elderly woman, Mrs. Harper, had lived for decades. She had avoided reporters, police, and curious neighbors since the Dawson disappearance. But Claire sensed that Mrs. Harper held something crucial, something that had been buried with fear for 20 years. The woman opened the door reluctantly, her hands trembling. "I wasn't going to talk," she said, voice barely audible. "They told me. They said if I spoke it would be worse for me. For my family." Claire nodded, careful not to pressure her. "I just need to know what you saw that night. You don't have to say more than you remember." Mrs. Harper led Claire to a small living room, filled with shadows and old photographs. Her eyes darted nervously to the windows before she spoke. "I saw them, the van. Dawson's van. Headlights cutting through the dark. I was standing by the edge of the forest when it slowed down. But it wasn't Thomas driving. Not him, someone else. A stranger. Tall, broad shoulders, something about him. I can't describe it properly, but he was in control. And the family, they were arguing. They were terrified, her words hung in the room like smoke. Claire pressed further. Did anyone else see this? Mrs. Harper shook her head. No, they warned me. Told me to stay quiet. I had children, I obeyed. I wanted to help, but I was too scared. A sudden clarity hit Claire. This witness, silenced for decades, had seen exactly what had happened on the road that night. Her testimony corroborated the mysterious phone calls, the gang sightings, and the van's later discovery in the quarry. Yet the woman's fear also hinted at something more sinister, a threat powerful enough to keep a witness silent for 20 years. Mrs. Harper paused, as if remembering something else. I think they wanted the family gone. Not just vanished, someone powerful was involved. The men at the roadside, they weren't acting alone. Claire's recorder captured every hesitant whisper. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, yet even with this revelation, the picture remained incomplete. Who had orchestrated the abduction? And how had they ensured that everyone who might see or know was silenced? As Claire left the cul-de-sac, the sky darkened with heavy clouds, mirroring the storm of questions in her mind. The road stretched before her, empty and silent, as if it still remembered that fateful night. Somewhere along that highway, the truth had been buried, and those who had seen it had been forced into silence. The Dawson family's disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It was a deliberate act, executed with precision and hidden in plain sight, and yet even now, Claire felt the lingering presence of someone watching, waiting, ensuring that certain truths remained just out of reach. Who had the power to silence witnesses for 20 years, and why? Claire returned to the county archives with a sense of urgency. She had accumulated witness testimonies, diaries, phone records, and photographs, but one thread remained elusive: the official investigation. She needed to know why the case had gone cold and who had actively suppressed it. Hours of paperwork revealed anomalies immediately. Key evidence had vanished. Police reports, witness statements, even photographs of the Dawson van from the original searches were missing. Officers who had been involved were either retired, transferred abruptly, or had resigned under personal circumstances. Patterns emerged that could not be ignored. Someone on the inside had intervened. She tracked down Officer James Caldwell, a retired detective who had been stationed in the county during the disappearance. He was hesitant at first, glancing over his shoulder as if someone were listening. "I don't know what you're hoping to find," he said. His voice was hoarse, cautious. "Some things are better left buried." Claire leaned forward. "Officer Caldwell, I think someone in the department suppressed evidence. Why were reports removed? Why were witnesses ignored? People have died or disappeared." "I need the truth," Caldwell sighed, shoulders slumping. "You want honesty?" The father, Thomas Dawson. He had dirt on a powerful politician. Not minor stuff, large financial criminal. He threatened to go public. I was told to bury anything that could expose them. That's why the evidence went missing. That's why some witnesses were intimidated. Claire felt the chill of realization. The disappearance had not been random. It had been deliberate. The Dawsons had been targeted. Corruption ran deep. The people who should have protected them had actively worked against them. Caldwell's hands shook as he admitted more. The first officer on the scene reported signs of foul play, but he was transferred overnight. Never questioned again. I was part of the cover-up, though I tried to shield what I could. I thought it was for the best. I thought I was saving my own family from retaliation. Claire recorded everything, each word heavier than the last. The web of lies extended beyond the van, the road, and the quarry. It stretched into every office, every decision, every silence. Someone powerful had manipulated the investigation, ensuring that the Dawson family's fate would remain a secret. But even with this confession, questions persisted. Who had ordered the cover-up? How many people had participated knowingly? And, most importantly, what had really happened to the Dawsons that night? As she left Caldwell's home, the shadows lengthened across the street. The air was thick with unspoken truths. Claire realized that every revelation drew her closer to danger. Those who had silenced the Dawson family and silenced witnesses were still out there, watching, ensuring that some secrets never surfaced. The past, she understood, was not just a story. It was a weapon, wielded by those willing to kill, to vanish, to bury the truth entirely. And somewhere in the darkness, the person or persons responsible was waiting, ready to make sure Claire's digging did not go any further. The package arrived on Claire's doorstep without a return address. It was unassuming. A small brown cardboard box taped shut and lightly dusted with dirt. Inside, she found a VHS tape marked only with the date of the Dawson disappearance, July 12, 2005, and a single note typed in block letters. "Watch it. Know the truth." Her hands trembled as she inserted the tape into a borrowed VCR in her apartment. The screen flickered to life with static. Then a shaky image emerged. The Dawson van, headlights cutting through the trees along a lonely stretch of road. The camera angle suggested someone was hiding, filming from the edge of the forest. The van's interior was partially visible. Shadows of family members moved within. Voices whispered, then rose in panic, muffled by the night and distance. Claire leaned closer. The mother, Margaret, was speaking, her voice urgent, almost pleading. "You don't understand. We can't—" The tape cut off for a split second before resuming. A figure approached the driver's side of the van, tall, indistinct in the dim light. The van's headlights wavered as the figure gestured. The children screamed. Thomas, the father, shouted, but the words were lost in the blur of movement. Claire's stomach twisted. Someone else had been in control that night. The camera shifted, revealing glimpses of another vehicle parked in the shadows. Its engine hummed quietly, unnoticed by the van's occupants. The whisper of tires on gravel, the faint metallic clink of a door opening, each sound, subtle but deliberate, was preserved like a secret confession. Claire froze on one frame. The figure at the van's side seemed to glance directly at the camera, as if aware of being observed. For a heartbeat, the figure's face was visible, features obscured by a hood, but something about the posture was eerily calm, almost satisfied. Someone had recorded the disposal of the Dawson family. Someone had wanted the world to see, or perhaps feared that no one would. The tape ended abruptly. No screams, no resolution, only darkness and a final whisper. "Make it quick." Claire rewound the tape, watching again, trying to decipher details missed the first time. Every frame seemed to taunt her, revealing the family's terror yet withholding the identities of those responsible. Whoever sent the tape knew the impact it would have, knew she would be drawn deeper into the shadows of the case. The realization hit her like a blow. The Dawson disappearance was not only orchestrated, it had been documented. Someone had planned it meticulously, anticipating every move, every scream, and now, 20 years later, someone had chosen to reveal part of that truth. Her recorder and camera were useless for this. The evidence existed in analog, untraceable, untouchable by the digital age. Whoever filmed it had vanished long before the authorities could intervene. Claire sat back, pale, staring at the tape. The van, the screams, the figure, and that whisper. If someone had recorded the disposal of the family, then they knew what happened afterward, and perhaps they were still out there watching. Claire knew the retired detective. Officer Caldwell was her last chance at clarity. Every lead she had uncovered pointed to a larger, deliberate orchestration, and the VHS tape confirmed what she had feared. The disappearance had been planned. She arranged a meeting at a secluded cafe far from prying eyes. Caldwell arrived, hunched, cane in hand, his face pale and drawn. He avoided Claire's gaze, stirring his coffee nervously. "I warned you," he said quietly. "Some truths are dangerous. I have to know," Claire replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. The Dawson family didn't vanish randomly. Someone powerful was involved. Who? Caldwell's hands trembled as he leaned closer. It was the politician. Gerald Thorne. Wealthy, untouchable. Thomas Dawson, he discovered Thorne's illegal dealings. Not small stuff. Big money, corruption that could ruin him. Thomas threatened to go public. Thorne, he couldn't allow that. Claire's breath caught. Everything aligned, the warnings, the silenced witnesses, the missing evidence. The disappearance had been a calculated act of preservation for the powerful, and the Dawsons had been expendable. "Why the cover-up?" she asked. Caldwell's eyes welled with tears. "The department was under pressure, threats, bribes. I buried the evidence. I thought I was protecting my own family. If I'd exposed Thorne, they'd have come after me too. I thought, if I controlled what the public saw, maybe, just maybe, we'd survive. But I was wrong." He paused, voice cracking. The first officers on the scene saw things they shouldn't have. One tried to testify, transferred, silenced. The others, they learned quickly. Fear kept them quiet. And the Dawsons, They were gone before anyone could intervene. Claire felt the weight of the confession pressing down on her. 2 decades of lies, threats, and calculated silence, all to protect a single man's empire. Yet even Caldwell's confession left gaps. He didn't know everything, couldn't explain who physically removed the family or who documented their final moments. And the mother? Claire asked softly. Margaret Dawson, was she complicit? Or a victim? Caldwell shook his head. I don't know. She feared for her children, maybe tried to bargain. Maybe she had no choice. I can't say, that part remains hidden. Claire left the cafe, the city lights blurring through her rain-spattered windshield. The confession had answered some questions but left her with more. Gerald Thorne was the mastermind, but the execution, who drove the van off the road, who recorded it, who placed it in the quarry, remained a shadowed secret. The past was no longer a mystery. It was a dark, orchestrated crime layered with betrayal and corruption. And as Claire drove toward her apartment, she felt the unmistakable sense that someone, somewhere, was still watching her, ensuring that certain truths remained buried. Who had betrayed the Dawsons from within, and why had some truths remained hidden even from those who tried to protect them? Claire's investigation had peeled back layers of corruption, secrecy, and violence, yet one final piece still eluded her: the Dawson children. The eldest daughter, Emily, had left behind a diary that hinted at hidden knowledge, fear, and a plan. But as Claire reviewed the entries again, a new, terrifying possibility emerged. Emily may have played a role in what had happened that night. Piecing together the timeline, Claire realized the daughter had been aware of her father's discovery of Gerald Thorne's criminal dealings. Emily's diary hinted that she had overheard conversations between her parents, whispered threats, and plans to go public. Fear had consumed her. Fear not only for herself but for her siblings. The entries suggested she had tried to intervene, attempting to influence events in a way she thought would prevent disaster. Yet the very act of intervention may have been her undoing. Claire uncovered phone records showing Emily's communications with unknown contacts on the night of the disappearance. The evidence implied she had tipped someone off, someone she trusted, believing it would protect the family. But in doing so, she inadvertently set in motion the chain of events that led to their vanishing. The horror of the realization weighed heavily on Claire. The victim and the unwitting accomplice could be the same person. Emily's youthful fear, her desperate attempts to control a situation beyond her understanding, had collided with the ruthless orchestration of those who wanted the Dawsons gone. Her diary's abrupt end, mid-sentence, now suggested more than interruption. It hinted at her own exposure. Or worse. Claire also noticed subtle omissions. There was no record of Emily being with the family at the time of the abduction. Had she been absent, hiding? Or had she been taken elsewhere? Perhaps even cooperating under duress? The question gnawed at Claire. The diary had illuminated motives, but the daughter's ultimate fate remained a mystery. In the quiet of her apartment, Claire stared at the scattered evidence. The Dawsons' disappearance was no longer just a story of external threats. It was a story of family fracture, of fear, betrayal, and tragic miscalculation. Emily, the child who had tried to protect her family, may have unintentionally sealed their fate. Yet the most unsettling thought lingered. If Emily had survived, she would know the truth. And if she were alive, where was she hiding after 20 years? Someone had erased the family from public life. But perhaps the last piece, the daughter, was still out there watching, waiting, or carrying a burden no one else could comprehend. Who had survived that night? And could the one who knew everything finally be found? Claire returned to the quarry where the Dawson van had been discovered, now fenced off and cordoned with police tape. Years of weather had eroded the surrounding terrain, but the vehicle remained, a grotesque monument to secrets long buried. Standing there, she imagined the family inside, the arguments, the terror, the frantic whispers of a mother and the desperate attempts of a daughter trying to protect them all. Investigators had cleaned the interior, but Claire noticed subtle anomalies that had gone unreported. Scuff marks on the floorboards, faint smudges on the dashboard, and deep scratches near the sliding door. All suggested a struggle. Someone had fought. Someone had tried to escape. Yet no human trace remained beyond the skeletal evidence. The wind carried a low, mournful sound through the trees like a whisper of voices long silenced. Claire shivered, suddenly aware that the quarry was not just a site of discovery, but a keeper of memory, of acts that could not be fully explained. She imagined Emily, the daughter, perhaps witnessing the horror from some unseen corner, trying to reconcile fear with action, powerless against forces far beyond her control. Her recorder clicked as she documented every detail, every mark, every eerie reflection in the cracked glass. Yet for all the evidence, the final truth remained elusive. The mastermind, Gerald Thorne, had vanished into wealth and influence, untouchable. The strangers who had orchestrated the abduction were untraceable, and Emily's ultimate fate was unknown. Perhaps she had survived, hidden away, carrying memories too heavy for the world to bear, or perhaps she had perished silently, another victim lost to the shadows. Claire traced her fingers along the van's rusted exterior, imagining the panic that must have gripped the family as they realized their lives had been stolen from them. Every piece of evidence, the diary, the VHS tape, the testimonies, the confessions, formed a mosaic of terror and betrayal. But the picture was incomplete, intentionally so, leaving the darkest corners unseen. As she turned to leave, a shadow passed across the quarry's edge. Claire froze, heart hammering. The wind shifted. No sound followed. She tried to convince herself it was imagination, the mind filling in the spaces of horror it could not yet reconcile. But deep down, she knew the watcher was still out there, someone who had orchestrated, observed, and ensured the family's vanishing remained a secret for 2 decades. The quarry had given her pieces of the truth, yet it demanded silence in return. She understood that some stories were never fully revealed. Some acts of cruelty, betrayal, and fear were meant to linger, echoing across time, unanswered and unresolved. Claire walked away, the gravel crunching beneath her boots, haunted by one undeniable thought. The Dawson family had disappeared, but their echoes remained. And someone, somewhere, still knew exactly what had happened, who after 20 years still held the ultimate key to their fate.